Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, the latest on the $105 billion in supplemental defense spending the White House is trying to move through Congress. Find out the latest about the package from Capitol Hill. And China and the Philippines go head-to-head on the high seas, prompting a response from U.S. officials. Get a look at the naval encounters. Plus, Marines embrace the deadly powers of the Robotic Goat. Do you think they strapped a rocket launcher to it? I mean, what else would Marines do? Also, go inside the plant where the military's parachutes are designed. We get a tour behind the scenes. It's those stories and more in the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. With a range of global security concerns to attend to, the U.S. is under pressure to provide aid to allies while keeping an eye on rivals in the Indo-Pacific region. But with Congress paralyzed by the Republican search for a House Speaker, getting support overseas is not a simple matter. Defense News congressional correspondent Bryant Harris brings us an update on the latest defense topics from Capitol Hill.
Bryant, it's busy times on Washington, D.C. and on Capitol Hill. The president just asked for something like $106 billion as supplemental for all the activities going on around the world, I think in Ukraine, in Israel, and beyond. Tell us about that package that the president asking Congress to approve.
Yeah, this is, as you noted, this $106 billion, that's a huge supplemental request. The most of it, roughly $61 billion, is economic and military aid for Ukraine. The DoD is about to run out of funding to continue supplying them with weapons, and I don't think they have funding any longer to backfill U.S. stockpiles of weapons we've already sent them. So that's a large part of this. The second thing, as we saw with the in the follow-up of the unfortunate massacre of Israelis in Gaza, they now want $14 billion to continue providing weapons, Iron Dome interceptors, and munitions for Israel. And for the past 2 weeks, of course, Israel has continued bombing Gaza. So that's what those munitions would go towards. And then that's the bulk of the package. And then there's a comparatively a small percentage for the Indo-Pacific, specifically about $3.4 billion to invest in the submarine industrial base for AUKUS to transfer nuclear submarines to Australia.
AUKUS is Australia, United States, and the UK?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a trilateral agreement where we send submarines to Australia as an interim capability, Virginia-class submarines. The industrial base is behind on our submarine production goals, so the intent of those funds is to give them more money to kind of bolster their infrastructure and workforce development. And then there's $2 billion in foreign military finance and military grants and loans for partners and allies in the Indo-Pacific, including Taiwan, to help arm them as well. But again, the bulk of this is for Ukraine and Israel.
Brian, the way I understand it is we send munitions to Ukraine from our stocks, and then we backfill the stocks from factories, from building these munitions, so that we have our own stocks and munitions that we can use for conflicts all over the world. And now those stocks are being used for Ukraine, a certain amount for Israel. How is the United States working to get those backfills ordered, and are they running into any kind of troubles?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I will say in the supplemental request that President Biden sent Congress last week, the White House noted that at least I think 50 billion of that is for goes back here in the U.S. into our defense industrial base. So that is an argument President Biden is now explicitly making when he's pushing for Ukraine and Israel funding. Prior to that, for Ukraine, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had made that argument, but Biden wasn't making it so much. But when it comes to the industrial base, much of the aid we've sent Ukraine and Israel now so far, and actually Taiwan for that matter too, has been through Presidential Drawdown Authority, which, as you said, it goes from U.S. stockpiles. Of course, then it comes time for the U.S. to replenish those, which is where a lot of these funds are going. The thing about that, though, is we, as people have been following very closely since the COVID pandemic, we have quite a few industrial capacity constraints, so we can't, a lot of programs are slipping. We are having trouble quickly replenishing our munitions that we sent to Ukraine and now Israel. And when you have two active conflicts in Ukraine and Israel that we're arming, it makes you wonder if we can sustain a third conflict if something were to happen in the Indo-Pacific, of course.
And the industrial base, the defense industrial base, is definitely not immune from the supply chain issues that any other factory, any other kind of manufacturing sees. And with Ukraine being a significant sized conflict and Gaza just geographically being a smaller place, but it's still a significant area that's going to take a lot of munitions. If something happens with Taiwan, which itself is a small country, it would be attacked by China, which is an enormous country. Would we have enough munitions to kind of fill those three conflicts?
So great question. At the risk of prognosticating, I think most people would say right now the answer is no. I know that House China Committee a few months ago, they had their own tabletop exercises, these war game tabletop exercises, and they found out, I think, within a week or two of a conflict with China in the Indo-Pacific over Taiwan, we would run out of LRASMs, for instance, long-range anti-ship missiles, and other munitions. And other war games have over Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific have replicated similar results. So that alone would, start to drain our stockpiles. And that's not even factoring in the, what we're sending Ukraine, the additional munitions we'd like to send Ukraine and Israel, for that matter.
Brian, you have a lot on your plate right now. Thanks for covering it, and thanks for having us over.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Next up, tensions between the Philippines and China have prompted a response from the U.S. State Department, which declared it would defend its ally per a 1951 treaty if conflict broke out. At issue are shoals in the South China Sea. China has made sweeping claims to the sea, but the Philippines maintains a presence in some areas. Dispute over the shoals resulted in dust-ups between the two nations, including a minor collision between Coast Guard ships from the two countries. Footage shows a Chinese Coast Guard ship menacing a Philippine vessel. Separately, the Chinese government released footage of a Philippine ship crossing the bow of one of its ships. The altercations prompted a strong reaction from Philippine officials.
But we are here to really decry, in the strongest possible terms, this egregious violation and illegal act within the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, and the obfuscation of the truth by China's distorting the story to fit its own ends, and the duplicity of China in claiming to be peaceful and claiming to be friendly while resorting to these aggressive acts.
The tension also prompted the State Department to issue a statement asserting China had violated international law, and spurred Secretary of State Antony Blinken to declare the U.S. would honor its defense pact with the Philippines, saying, quote, "An armed attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, and aircraft will invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments under the treaty."
Just this past week, the PRC vessels acted dangerously and unlawfully as our Philippine friends conducted a routine resupply mission within their own exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. I want to be clear. I want to be very clear. The United States defense commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. The United States defense agreement to the Philippines is ironclad.
And stay tuned. When we return, we go inside the plant where the military's parachutes are made. Don't go away. Welcome back. The military on any given day has tens of thousands of parachutes in circulation, on the backs of everyone from Rangers and airborne soldiers to Special Forces troops. Simply put, there's a lot of people leaping out of planes every day. Where do all these chutes come from? Military Times senior editor Sarah Sicard got an inside look at the facility where many of the military's parachutes are designed and made.
If you've ever jumped out of a military airplane, there's a good chance you survived because of J.C. Berland. The engineer has spent most of his life with his head literally in the clouds after learning to fly at 16, spending his youth in France building paragliders with his dad, and doing 17 years in the French military as a pilot.
This is where I belong. I mean, the air is where I belong. Every time I exit the plane, it's always the same feeling. It has never changed. Yeah. It was a couple, skydiving centers in France who did this, and I was so intrigued that I just signed up and went for a course. And the instructor just came back from the US where he learned how to do this, and I was one of his first students. And on my first jump, I knew I was at destination. I said oh, shit, that's what I wanted to do. And then it took off from there.
Now, as the Vice President of Engineering at Airborne Systems, his job is to make sure that the thousands of American and Allied airborne troops that take to the skies for military missions and training exercises make it safely back down to Earth. Airborne Systems has manufacturing plants in both New Jersey and California. The process of making a parachute at either facility is incredibly labor-intensive, and the parachute supply chain is tenuous, with just a few companies producing the materials needed. Moreover, if a single seam doesn't line up anywhere in the sewing process on a parachute, the whole thing can be ruined. Touring the floor at the New Jersey facility, you get a first-hand glimpse at just how intensive the parachute making process is. The highly skilled workers meticulously scrutinize every single stitch that goes into the 25 by 25 foot nylon parachutes used across the US military. And in this niche business, testing is paramount. Berland himself makes the first jump for every system he designs.
I make a point in jumping all the prototypes we design first. And because sometimes when you make a design, you're focusing on one specific performance. So the initial design, you sort of ignore the rest. So it's like if you're building a race car, you say, okay, I want the maximum speed. So even if the brakes are a little wobbly, it's not that big of a deal because I know I'll deal with this later. The prototype could be dangerous for someone who exactly doesn't know what you're trying to achieve. So I make a point. I wouldn't forgive myself if I give it the first prototype to a member of the team and this guy or girl, because we have jumpers, female jumpers. If he or she gets hurt, that I couldn't forgive myself. So I have a lot of jumps yet.
Currently, Airborne Systems supplies parachutes to all 4 branches of the military and handles space missions as well. So if you've done a jump in uniform, you may have worn one of their products. For Military Times, I'm Sarah Sicard.
Now from the C4ISR space, the machines are getting smarter. In this case, blimps. Blimps? Technically called Aerostats, the floating aircraft used for surveillance and communications platforms are due for an update. Lorena Adams, Program Manager of Terrestrial Sensors for the Army, said the force is looking at how to use Aerostats in the future force. Here's some of her interview with C4ISRNet's Colin Demarest at the Association of the United States Army's annual exposition.
Another area of autonomy that we're looking at is adding autonomy to our Aerostats capabilities as well. There's a significant sustainment tail for that platform. So the ability to add autonomy will help reduce our sustainment costs. And then there are also opportunities to evaluate other sensors with AI/ML embedded to increase our mission sets and our what we can provide to the Army.
So you mentioned Aerostats. I think they kind of look old school, kind of in the in your mind's eye.
Right.
How is the Army taking advantage of something like that, but with kind of these modern applications like autonomy?
That's a great question, and that's one of my priorities is to help reimagine Aerostats. I think recently there's the Aerostats I think is synonymous with the old fight coin. But what we're trying to see is if we can expand the applicability of the Aerostat to other missions that will support the Army in 2030 by looking at incorporating other types of sensors, maybe working in counter UAS as an option into the force protection package that an Aerostat would provide. So we're starting to have those conversations with the requirements community within the Army to figure out what the needs are. And then we're also looking at industry as well to see what advancements they've made as well. So I had an opportunity to observe recently an autonomous Aerostat capability, which would allow us to move down that road of being smaller, being able to provide other types of sensors that could satisfy different mission needs that we're not currently supporting.
And when we're talking like autonomous Aerostats, are we talking about it can move to a different location and then sit there, or are we talking about more like what's the payload?
Really, the autonomous piece will allow us to reduce the manning requirements associated with having to maintain, move, and sustain that capability. So just the manning alone, reducing the footprint, will reduce the cost.
So putting those people or those resources elsewhere because it is now kind of automatically handled.
Exactly.
When we return, we hear the latest tips for first-time homebuyers from our personal finance expert. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack returns with advice for first-time homebuyers.
Buying a home is a major life decision. Add rising interest rates and home prices, and most first-time homebuyers might be rethinking it. The truth is, with the equally rising cost of rent, homeownership may be the way to go, not to mention the many other benefits that come along with owning. As a first-time buyer, your best friends and resources will be your lender and your realtor. Find ones you trust and seek their guidance. After a look at your financial situation, they'll be able to help you decide whether or not you're in a good position to buy, and then how much house you can afford once you're ready. Then it's time to apply and get pre-approved. Look for a mortgage with no money down or a lender who help with closing costs. If you're in the military, apply for a VA loan if you're eligible. Work with a lender that has expertise with VA loans for a smoother process. And take advantage of any other programs and discounts your military service provides you. Your first home will be a dream come true, even in an uncertain real estate market. Following these tips can ensure that dream also extends to your first-time home buying experience.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, set your targeting computer to militarytimes.com as well as defensenews.com. And to be the most up-to-date sailor in the Zodiac, sign up for our Early Bird Brief newsletter, compiled each morning to bring you the latest headlines. And it's also an audio. Check out the podcast version out each weekday wherever you get your podcasts. If social media is where you get your open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And stick around. After the break, robotic goats armed with missiles. We'll say no more. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. Small robotic quadrupeds are a developing system for the military. From the robotic dog being tested by the Army, to the robotic squirrel meant for small squads and special forces. So, what did the Marines get? The robotic goat. And what did they do with it? Strap a rocket launcher to it, of course. Marine Corps Times reporter Irene Lowenson is here to talk about the Corps' newest gadget.
It's often the question a Marine asks when presented with a new piece of technology. Wait, could I strap a rocket launcher to this thing? Members of the Marines Tactical Training and Exercise Control Group last month asked and answered just that question when working with a four-legged battle buddy dubbed the Robotic Goat. Actually a robotic dog, the Goat was part of a test of a remote triggering system for an M72AS light anti-tank weapon trainer, the Marines said. The military across the branches is looking at a range of robotic quadrupeds to be used for reconnaissance purposes or as pack animals in the field, sending them out on dangerous missions that don't necessarily require a human. Marines out at 29 Palms, California, apparently set out to answer the question, why not? And sent the Goat out with the weapon strapped to its back. The concept is simple, the Marines said. Instead of sending a Marine into a dangerous position to fire the weapon, why not just send the creepy robotic Goat? The Marine could safely stay behind cover while the Goat gets closer for a better shot. The result was a captivating bit of footage released by the Marines in September, showing the marriage of the two remote systems. The Marines note that this particular robot isn't actually military issue. You can actually buy it on Amazon, and the test was just a proof of concept idea. Robots have become one focus of the Marine Corps' modernization initiative, Force Design 2030, aimed at getting the service branch ready for a conflict with a great power like China. They're also researching support systems developed by DARPA to be used as a pack animal to carry weapons or supplies. The Navy, for its part, is experimenting with using robot dogs to help with ship maintenance. And the Army has even considered just straight up putting a squad weapon on a robot dog to send into battle. But the Goat perhaps most recalls the Terminator, the flamethrower-equipped dog of a very similar make to the Marines version. The sky's the limit, apparently, when it comes to mounting deadly weapons on four-legged robots. So, we'll see what's next. For Marine Corps Times, I'm Irene Lowenson.
And that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll bring you more military news next week.